I was up early in the middle of the night, actually up and had a tough time getting back to sleep. Even though I got to bed early last night to close my 3-day holiday weekend, I was woken in the middle of the night, startled awake. I thought someone was actually outside pounding on my Jeep with a sledgehammer. And I jumped out of bed, raced to the window, and couldn't see anybody outside. And that's when I realized what I was likely hearing was the fireworks finale that was taking place here in Twin Falls. And it raises an interesting question. I know that a lot of people out there love fireworks. I love them too. But once you've actually seen a good fireworks display, they all pretty much look the same. I mean, I hate to say it. There's all this controversy this morning about PBS last night because of cloud cover in Washington actually showing stock footage of previous fireworks, and you look at that and you say, well, but they still look pretty. The last year's fireworks look a lot like this year's fireworks. However, as most people who had a 3-day weekend had to get up early to go to work today, why do we shoot off the fireworks on Monday night? Why not on Sunday night when a larger crowd could stay up late, watch the fireworks, and then sleep in late on the holiday, so therefore they wouldn't. I'm sorry, maybe I'm being too logical here. I do want to say I had a great time. I went to Buell yesterday for the parade, and I had a wonderful time. Beautiful weather. It was not a hot day. It was just a nice, cool breeze. I got a chance to meet some great people. I sat down for a while before the parade and actually was talking with a couple of ladies from out that way. One is originally from Bavaria, and the other, her family used to own a furniture store in town, and got to chat with them. Learned a lot about Buell and the history of the place just from chatting with the two of them. And then I walked around the parade route and got a lot of photographs. One of the best photographs I have, a giant slice of pizza. Well, it's a guy dressed as a giant slice of pizza, is walking a dog, looks like a Dalmatian down the street. And I got a great picture of this. The Dalmatian decides to stop and sniff some of the piles left behind from the horses. And I think the guy in the pizza suit didn't notice that because he's just walking along, and he must have had some messy sneakers when he got home. But they were black. I mean, if you got black shoes, it's a little bit easier to clean those up. If you don't get all the stains off of them, who's going to know? Well, if you have white shoes, that's a serious problem. It's 9 minutes after 8 o'clock. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX, newsradio1310.com. Steve Millington will be joining us in just a few minutes. Also coming up, I've got some folks after 9 o'clock. They were alarmed last week when they heard me talking about tuberculosis on the air. And I mentioned that story that we've had some refugees who've come here with TB. And of course, we're living in an era when a lot of tuberculosis is now drug resistant. In other words, you can't cure it, I guess, unless you cut out the lungs. But they were a little bit alarmed because they like to tell us that it's not communicable, apparently. That is, you're not going to catch it, which raises the question then just exactly how do you catch TB? Do you have to pull your lungs out and have somebody else pull their lungs out and rub your lungs together? Or is it by osmosis? But we'll get an answer to that coming up after 9 o'clock news this morning. Bill Colley with you on Top Story at 62, 10 minutes after 8 o'clock exactly. This morning on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. The story is Top Story, or the show is Top Story, or is it the story is Top Show? It's one of those. You figure that one out on your own, I guess, this morning. Did anyone see the story? The Kennedy family got together yesterday. That Kennedy family, you know, the one that with presidents and senators in the family. Well, one president, luckily, one was enough, and senators in the family. They got together, and as the media likes to say, they had a party at the Kennedy family compound. No one's ever talked about a party at the Colley family compound. I guess it's because it's not that big. But they got together. They had their 4th of July Independence Day celebration. And one of the daughters of the late, they always say late, he's been gone almost 50 years, Robert Kennedy, one of his daughters actually put up a picture on the internet of a Donald Trump piñata that they were celebrating with. And then within a few hours, she decided to take it down. And isn't this funny? Ha, ha, ha. We liberal Democrats, we've got a Trump piñata. Ha, 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 ha. I understand they took the picture down because they decided to throw the piñata in the back seat of an old Oldsmobile, and then they drove out on a bridge and took it for a bath. Well, they're liberals. They can get away with anything. FBI Director Comey has scheduled an 11 o'clock Eastern Time news conference, so in less than 1 hour, the FBI director is going to be talking to the media. Now, there's some speculation he's going to allow Hillary Clinton to skate when it comes to all of her email issues. My guess is that's probably true, albeit if he would follow the law, he would recommend indictment. But once again, if you're a Democrat, you can drown young ladies and get away with it. So when it comes to somebody showing their emails to the Chicoms and the Russians, well, what's the big deal? After all, the ends justify the means when it comes to this crowd in Washington today, and the ends are dragging Hillary Clinton along the finish line or across the finish line come November, and therefore liberals and fellow Democrats and fellow travelers and folks in media, they can all go out and marry horses, cows, and pigs after Hillary gets elected president because, of course, they all know that that's the most important thing for America. Forget the $20 trillion officially we're in debt. Forget the sagging economy. Forget the lack of growth over the last decade. Nope. What we need to do is marry horse and cows and pigs, and then America will finally fulfill its true mission. I happened to see one of those America-hating stories yesterday at a publication called Vox, and the guy said, well, we would have been better off without the revolution because the British would have brought an end to slavery. Well, the Brits did bring an end to slavery. What was it? Wilberforce, was that his name? Sometime in the 1820s, I believe it was. They did bring an end to slavery, but this notion, if the British had been able to hold on to the Deep South and all of that fine quality cotton was coming out of there and being shipped to the textile mills in England, do you think the British would have been so quick? Do you think they would have moved so fast to eliminate slavery? Maybe not, because the Brits at that time liked making money, hand over fist. And if you look at their behavior in other countries around the world, Africa, throughout Africa, South Africa, and many of the other territories that they held on that continent, the way they treated the Aboriginal people in Australia and a great many people in India, my guess is that wouldn't have happened. But liberals like to dream these dreams because they just look back at America and say America was evil, rotten to the core, and isn't it great we're here today to save it? And that happens to be their worldview. And then this morning in USA Today, there's a columnist, and he's drinking the same Kool-Aid, and that columnist is saying, Donald Trump wants to make America great again, but it was never great. Really? Why don't you ask the people who were liberated in France and Belgium and Holland how they feel about that statement? My guess is that they're going to look at things, and they're not even Americans, but they're going to look at things in a vastly different light. Many, many years ago, when I was just before I got into the talk show business, early part of the last decade, so not long after the turn of the century, I happened to be out doing a story about a big snowstorm, just light story about a big snowstorm. And I was interviewing these people at this gas station who had pulled off the highway and they were taking shelter. When all of a sudden, this man pulling a trailer comes into the parking lot. He pulls up to the gas pumps. He's got Quebec plates and he starts pumping gas. And I walked over to talk to him, figuring, well, if he's from up in Quebec, he's used to driving in a lot of snow, so this is not going to bother him. And he had a French accent, but then he said, but I'm not a native Quebecer. He said, I actually moved to Montreal to run a business, he said, in the 1960s. He said, but I grew up in Normandy. And he said, I was a little boy in June of 1944 when I looked up the highway and all I could see were Americans coming down the road. And he said, there was never such a prettier sight in my entire life. Now, I'm here to interview him about the snowstorm, and he's telling me all of this. And he said, and I've got no problem with America going to war against evil people today because that's what you do. It's 8:15. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. Speaking of media and its condescension to the regular working Americans who really built this country, the New York Times Sunday Review had this. I saw this morning online. I didn't look at a lot of headlines over the weekend. I was busy with other things. A fellow by the name of Stephen Greenhouse, sounds like a liberal and a guy you'd expect to be out there yapping about global warming. We'll talk about global warming a little later in the program. Two big stories today say that scientists are now warning about global cooling, but hey, one didn't work, let's try the other. This fellow says he's writing from Greensburg, Pennsylvania. This faded mining town east of Pittsburgh seems right out of the Deer Hunter, one of the many blue-collar, gun-loving communities that dot western Pennsylvania. In other words, it's foreign territory. It's like a lunar landscape to this guy. And he goes on to say, for Donald J. Trump, such largely white working-class towns are crucial to his hopes in the presidential campaign. That many white male union members are embracing Mr. Trump doesn't necessarily mean overall union membership is moving right. However, in recent years, as unions have organized more government workers and low-wage workers, The percentage of union members who are black, Hispanic, or female has risen, and those groups are solidly anti-Trump. Can he be so sure of that? If Trump is out there saying, look, we end some of these trade deals, we bring back some jobs to the United States, whether he can pull it off or not, and you're a black man out there and you need a job, or you're a Latin man and you need a job, or woman, let's be politically correct there, or woman, do you think there might be some sort of appeal to that? Not everybody out there is a liberal dope-smoking snob from Manhattan, okay? Or Boulder, Colorado. And then they have this. G. Terry Madonna, a professor of public affairs at Franklin and Marshall College in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, said Mr. Trump might do considerably better than Mr. Romney, who lost every Rust Belt state except Indiana. Now, the overall polls I was looking at today at Red State, where they track a number of these, or excuse me, not Red State, Real Clear Politics, that was it. They both start with R. Hey, it's been a 3-day weekend. I was looking at Real Clear Politics. Hillary Clinton seems to have a lead in most of those polls. One of them shows her up by 6, another by about 3. But here's the thing. Once again, Hillary Clinton is overwhelmingly going to win a populated state like California, where they've got 40 million people. Well, you probably have 60 million, and 20 million of those illegal immigrants will be voting too. So she can have, in the popular vote, she can have this huge lead in places like California and a couple of other populous states on the East Coast. But she's only going to get so many electoral votes, whether she wins 51-49 or whether she wins 99-1 in those states. She cannot add to those electoral vote totals. So she could rack up a lot of votes overall, nationwide. But if she doesn't win all of the states in between and she only ends up with New York and a handful of New England states and, the folks in New Jersey who can't tell their bottoms from a hole in the ground, and Donald Trump ends up winning everything else, he wins the election. And there's still a long way to go here. If Director Comey says in his news conference coming up in about 40 minutes that he recommends indictment, and that if Loretta Lynch doesn't dare do it because Bill Clinton threatened to kneecap her last week, that's as bad for Hillary Clinton's campaign. I swear to you, it's bad for Hillary Clinton's campaign, just as bad as if they do indict her. And I think that is going to spell a lot more trouble. I realize that among you fellow travelers who are listening out there, as I said yesterday, the Democrats, both of them that are campaigning for office in Idaho, were in the parade and they were at the very end of it with the jackasses. And they had to march through and drive through all of the brown stuff that was deposited by the horses before them. They were all out there, of course, and I was watching them drive by and I thought, they don't care. Again, in their mind, the ends justify the means. So if Hillary Clinton's a crook, that's irrelevant. Again, their goal is, can I marry my horse, cow, or pig come next year once she's president? It doesn't matter what a scoundrel she happens to be. She's going to get their votes. Let's just hope that there are enough moral Americans still that will look around and say, oh my gosh, we can't do this. We've got more coming up. Steve Millington will be joining us shortly, too, from the Twin Falls County Republican Party. It's 8:20.